They never wanted you to notice this, and worse, they already use it against you every single day. While most people chase easy answers and cheap distractions, a minority masters an invisible code that can bend reality to its own will. It is the same principle that drives billions in political and advertising campaigns, and it is the same one that turns entire masses into an obedient herd without them noticing. Your thoughts, your emotions, and even that feeling you believe is harmless are decoded, manipulated, and reprogrammed. The subconscious mind is the key to creating or destroying your life, and they know that key better than you do. There is a reason they keep these laws hidden. If everyone knew how to apply them, the control would end within hours. People ask me why I keep my identity secret. It is simple. My statements put the status quo at risk. With each passing day, more people wake up, but every minute lost is a silent vote for the elite to keep its grip. Are you going to keep emitting frequencies that feed their game, or are you finally going to take control and decide which reality you want to live in?
Most people believe that they control their own lives by making rational decisions, by planning, and by acting based on the circumstances. However, that comfortable narrative ignores an inconvenient fact. There are invisible forces shaping every detail of your experience, and it is not superstition. Those forces are real, they are measurable, and, most provocatively, they are being used by others consciously, while most people remain blind to them. What is at stake here is the understanding of how your reality is stitched together out of frequencies. These are not metaphorical or poetic frequencies, but concrete vibrational patterns with physical properties that obey laws as rigorous as gravity. Whoever understands how these patterns work learns how to alter the fabric of his or her life. Whoever ignores them becomes a hostage to a game whose rules he or she does not know. In the physical world, constructive interference is a simple phenomenon. Two waves meet, their crests and troughs align, and they create a wave with a much greater amplitude. This is the language of the tides, of acoustics, and of light, and surprisingly, it is also the language of the mind. Thoughts, emotions, and intentions are waves, not only in a figurative sense, but as detectable electromagnetic fields. The human brain, through its complex electrical activity, emits patterns that propagate, that interact, and that interfere with patterns coming from other brains, from environments, and from events. Now, imagine what happens when those three elements, thought, emotion, and conviction, vibrate in the same tuning. The sum is not linear, it is exponential. It is the mental equivalent of two identical tuning forks. Strike one, and the other will begin to vibrate without anyone touching it. This is the core of human creative power. And yet, how many people actually live like that intentionally? The majority of the population does not even realize that it is constantly tuning in, without awareness, to the predominant frequencies around it. Conversations loaded with pessimism, news saturated with fear, and environments heavy with tension. All of that recalibrates your vibration without asking for permission. That is why certain groups, especially in the advertising, political, and media spheres, obsessively study how brainwaves and human emotions work. They know that the control of frequency is the control of perceived reality. Why does this matter? Because when you understand this mechanism, you stop being just a passive receiver and you become a conscious transmitter. That change of role radically alters what you experience day by day. We are not talking about magic, but about physics applied to consciousness. There is also a factor that amplifies the urgency of this knowledge. The large-scale manipulation of these frequencies is already underway. And if that sounds exaggerated, then just notice how collective emotional patterns seem to spread in a synchronized way. Waves of outrage, euphoria, or fear, always with well-defined triggers, carefully repeated. That is vibrational engineering applied to human behavior. When people hear spirituality, many imagine a territory that is separate from science, one that is inhabited by subjective beliefs. That division is artificial. Spirituality, when it is stripped of myths and metaphors, is a study of consciousness and of its relationship with reality, and modern physics, neuroscience, and psychology increasingly converge on the same point. What is held consistently in the mind and in the heart is not merely a reflection of reality, but a mold for it. Therefore, this video proposes a deep investigation. How constructive interference, a principle known to science for more than a century, has a direct parallel in the way you think, feel, and project intentions, and how, by mastering that inner alignment, it is possible to create a field of resonance that can transform personal and collective experiences. To fully understand the scope of what we are discussing, we need to go back to the beginning of the 20th century, when physics faced a dilemma that could not be solved by the known laws. Classical theory failed to explain phenomena such as blackbody radiation and the photoelectric effect. In that context, in 1900, Max Planck proposed that energy was not emitted continuously, but in discrete packets, quanta. A few years later, Albert Einstein applied that idea to demonstrate that light could act as particles, opening a path that would forever break with Newtonian determinism. What seemed like a technical adjustment in the theory revealed something much more radical. The entire physical reality is sustained by patterns of energy that vibrate at specific frequencies. Solid matter, which had been believed to be the fundamental substance of the universe, began to be seen as a temporary condensation of energy. In the decades that followed, names such as Niels Bohr, Erwin Schrödinger, Werner Heisenberg, Max Born, and Paul Dirac deepened that revolution. From particle physics, there emerged a disconcerting portrait of the real. Every particle is, in essence, a localized manifestation of a wave of probability. When quantum physics says that everything is vibration, it is not referring to a spiritual metaphor, but to an experimental fact. Every state and every possible configuration corresponds to a defined frequency. In that scenario, not only atoms and molecules, but also mental and emotional processes are included. The human brain is both an emitter and a receiver of electrical and magnetic signals. Its neuronal discharges have measurable frequencies that vary according to the state of consciousness. Intense emotions such as fear or joy are not merely feelings, they are vibrational states that shape the functioning of the body and the way the mind interacts with the environment. Although this understanding is recent for science, it was already encoded in much older traditions. The Vedas, compiled millennia ago in India, describe the universe as a dance of sounds and vibrations. The concept of Nada Brahma, sound is the creator, surprisingly anticipates the principle that everything is, ultimately, frequency. The Upanishads speak about the unity between the individual being and the cosmic totality, not as a belief, but as a direct experience of attunement. In ancient China, the I Ching described the transformations of reality as dynamic combinations of yin and yang forces, which we can read as patterns of energy in flow. The Tao Te Ching, attributed to Laozi, insisted that harmony arises from aligning with the Tao, the fundamental way or flow that sustains all things. Although the language of those traditions is poetic and symbolic, the essence is clear. There is a field of invisible forces, and the way we position ourselves in relation to it determines the quality of our experience. In the West, echoes of that view appear in biblical texts. For where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there am I among them, Matthew 18:20, is not only a spiritual statement, it is also the description of a phenomenon of amplified intention. The physical gathering is merely the support for something subtler, the vibrational unification of minds focused on the same purpose. That convergence creates a more intense field, one that is capable of influencing events in a measurable way, even if the language of that time could not express it in terms of waves and frequencies. Despite their very different cultural origins and historical contexts, those traditions converge at a single point. The external reality is not independent of the internal state. That is an uncomfortable assertion for any worldview that prefers to separate the observer from the observed. However, contemporary physics confirms that the act of observing alters the observed system. What if that interference is more than a microscopic effect restricted to laboratory experiments? What if, rather than being limited to the quantum level of particles, it also operates at the scale of human relationships, choices, and everyday circumstances? This is the point where the lines between science and spirituality stop being parallel and start to intersect. In the vibrational world, there are two fundamental polarities: patterns that support, expand, and strengthen, and patterns that drain, contract, and weaken. This is the simplest expression of something that manifests in a complex way in every human being. A thought steeped in resentment carries a low-frequency signature. A thought of gratitude carries a high-frequency signature. The difference is not a matter of moral judgment, but a matter of measurable effect on the body and on the environment. Quantum mechanics also teaches something essential about change. The frequency of a system can be altered by superposition. When a wave of a specific form meets another wave of an opposite form, the original characteristics can be attenuated or even cancelled. This technique, which is known in the physical field, has a direct parallel in the mental field. Deliberately replacing one pattern of thought with another of an opposite frequency, for example, countering inner images of failure with vivid images of achievement, is an act of personal vibrational engineering. This view shifts the focus from the external world to the internal world. It is not because the external world is irrelevant, but because it is, to a large extent, a conditioned reflection of what happens in the internal field. That is the point where traditional spiritual discourse, the discoveries of physics, and contemporary neuroscience meet. The background, therefore, is established. We live immersed in a sea of frequencies. Every thought, every emotion, and every intention is a wave launched into that field, interacting with all the others. The question that arises is not whether we participate in this game, but whether we do it consciously or by inertia. That choice, to decide which frequency to sustain, is the boundary between being driven by circumstances and beginning to shape them. Inner alignment, when it is understood as constructive interference, becomes the most powerful tool that a human being can master. In the physical domain, that phenomenon is unequivocal. When two waves of the same frequency and the same phase meet, their amplitudes add, creating a more intense impulse. That is the basis of acoustics, optics, and signal engineering. However, when we transpose that logic to the mental and emotional field, the impact stops being merely technical and becomes transformative. Thought, emotion, and intention are not independent entities, but dimensions of the same vibrational process. Each of them has its own frequency, which is measured in the body as electrical and magnetic patterns, but those frequencies rarely operate in perfect alignment. Most of the time, the rational mind projects a goal, while the emotion carries a state that is incompatible with that goal, and the intention, the quiet, sustained focus, scatters. It is like trying to play a harmonious chord on an instrument with untuned strings. The sound exists, but it does not have power, and it does not resonate in space. The core concept here is to understand that when those three dimensions come into tune, same frequency, same phase, an exponential reinforcement occurs. It is not superficial, positive thinking, but the creation of internal coherence to the point that the mind, the heart, and the will vibrate as a single field. That coherence amplifies your capacity to influence outcomes, not only because of clearer action, but also because of the way it interacts with the environment. Science gives us powerful analogies to visualize this. A trivial example: tuning forks. Place two identical tuning forks side by side, strike only one, and the other will begin to vibrate by resonance. No physical contact is necessary, only the coincidence of frequency. The same thing happens with electromagnetic waves. A radio receiver does not create the station. It tunes to it, capturing what is already present in the field, but which only manifests when there is a frequency match. That logic is equally valid for the human field. Whatever is held consistently in the mind and in the heart acts like a transmitting and receiving station. The universe does not judge the quality of the signal. It simply responds to the frequency that is being emitted. Therefore, desiring something while vibrating at the opposite frequency is like trying to hear a 101 MHz transmission with the dial fixed at 88 MHz. The connection simply does not happen. Here, the spiritual perspective enters. Ancient traditions already describe that alignment, but in symbolic language. In the Upanishads, the realization of Atman as identical to Brahman is a metaphor for inner unification. When personal identity aligns with the cosmic principle, there is no more dissonance. In the Tao Te Ching, acting in harmony with the Tao is to follow the natural flow without resistance, a poetic description of frequency coherence. In Christianity, passages such as, "If two of you agree on earth about anything they ask, it will be done for them," point to the amplification that occurs when intentions align. Modern physics provides the literal translation of that symbolism. A coherent field is more stable and has a greater reach. In medicine, for example, cardiac coherence, when the heart rhythm stabilizes into harmonic patterns, improves communication between the heart and the brain, affects the immune system, and influences emotional perception. Extending the principle to life as a whole, an internally coherent state increases your capacity to perceive opportunities, to make decisions, and to sustain consistent actions. The provocative aspect is that this coherence does not require ideal external conditions. On the contrary, it is coherence that generates more favorable conditions. The greatest illusion is to believe that you must fix the external setting in order to then find inner alignment. That is like waiting for the tuning fork to begin to vibrate on its own and only then produce sound. The sequence is inverted. To make the concept tangible, it is worth turning to everyday examples that go unnoticed. Every time you use a cell phone, your voice is converted into digital signals, modulated into electromagnetic waves, transmitted through space, and then reconverted into sound on the other side. You do not see the waves, but you trust the process because you understand that the technology operates on the basis of precise physical principles. What people rarely consider is that thoughts and emotions work in an analogous way. They do not need cables or visibility to propagate. Here is the critical point. If that is the mechanism, then there is no way to avoid emitting frequencies. Even when you are doing nothing, you are emitting a pattern, whether it is one of clarity or one of confusion, one of confidence or one of insecurity. The difference lies in whether that emission is intentional or random. Inner coherence is precisely the passage from chance to conscious command. On a practical level, that means first identifying misalignment. It is possible to want success and at the same time to sustain inner images of failure. It is possible to seek healthy relationships while maintaining emotions of distrust or resentment. Those frequency conflicts cancel a significant portion of the creative impulse. The correction begins with perception, recognizing that it is not enough to formulate a goal mentally. The associated emotion and the sustained intention must be in tune. On a broader level, that concept also explains why cohesive groups have a disproportionate impact relative to their size. It is not the number of people that matters, but the degree of coherence among them. A small group with aligned intention can create a vibrational field that is more intense than a crowd scattered across conflicting states. That is the physics of collective consciousness. Therefore, the core idea is not merely to understand constructive interference as a physical phenomenon, but to apply it as a tool for inner alignment. When thought, emotion, and intention operate in phase, the resulting field not only changes how you act, but also interacts with reality in a way that reorganizes circumstances around that pattern. That is vibrational engineering in its most essential sense. The concept of inner coherence stops being an abstraction when we examine how perception actually shapes the reality that is experienced. The sequence is always the same. An event happens, the mind interprets it, and out of that interpretation comes the emotional and behavioral response. It is in that moment, almost always unconscious, that the frequency is defined. Two individuals can live through the same situation and come out with opposite internal states, not because the event itself is different, but because the lens through which it was filtered is not the same. Perception works like a radio tuner. Adjusting it is choosing which vibrational band you want to operate in. A negative reading triggers states of contraction, fear, anger, and resentment that not only restrict your capacity for action, but also attract compatible patterns. A constructive reading, even in the face of a challenge, activates states of expansion, focus, courage, and creativity that feed more effective actions and create new possibilities. That choice is not an exercise in forced optimism, but a deliberate adjustment of frequency, comparable to changing stations to capture a clearer signal. The problem is that most people allow that adjustment to be done by automatic patterns that have been sedimented by past experiences or by environmental influence. Repeated news with emotional bias, conversations filled with complaints, and carefully calibrated visual and sonic stimuli. All of that acts as frequency programming. We cannot ignore the role of the attention industry here. Advertisers and media strategists deliberately exploit the emotional architecture of human beings to induce specific states. It is not only about selling products, but also about shaping collective moods by synchronizing millions of minds into predictable vibrational bands. Neville Goddard, one of the few who spoke openly about this, insisted that disciplined imagination is the key to escaping that conditioning. For him, assuming a desired state of consciousness and sustaining it until it becomes natural is more than a creative act. It is an act of sovereignty. In practice, that means consciously choosing inner images, mental dialogues, and emotions that correspond to what you want to manifest, even if the external circumstances do not yet reflect that state. It is the opposite of reacting mechanically to what is right in front of your eyes. The physics of frequencies supports this view. Coherent brainwaves and coherent heart patterns send signals that are clear and consistent. States of inner conflict produce noise, which makes any ordered influence on the environment more difficult. What Goddard described as feeling it real is, from another angle, the creation of a vibrational field that attracts compatible events by resonance. There is no contradiction between mystical language and technique. They are different descriptions of the same mechanism. In daily life, this translates into very concrete situations. Consider the difference between entering a negotiation while carrying anxiety and insecurity and entering with an internal state of confidence and clarity. Your posture, your voice, and your micro-expressions all change. and other people's responses change too. That adjustment does not occur only on a psychological plane. There are measurable physiological changes, such as variations in heart rate variability and hormonal chemistry, that affect performance and the way others perceive you. The luck that many people attribute to certain individuals is often the accumulated consequence of that internal coherence. The counterpart is equally true. Maintaining lofty mental goals while feeding on low frequencies creates an unstable field. It is the classic case of someone who desires prosperity but spends the day immersed in financial worry, or someone who seeks healthy relationships while cultivating old resentments. Those dissonances not only delay results, but also reinforce unwanted patterns. It is like trying to transmit on one frequency while simultaneously emitting another opposite one. The final signal is distorted. Physics offers a precise analogy for that: destructive interference. When two waves of the same frequency but opposite phases meet, they cancel each other. In the mental field, that cancellation occurs when conscious intention is sabotaged by contrary emotions and beliefs. The result is the frustrating sensation of going in circles, as if a lot of effort were producing very little progress. One of the most revealing aspects is that this dynamic is not restricted to the individual. Small groups with aligned intention can generate fields of influence that are much larger than the sum of their members. It is the same logic as a tuned choir. Different voices, but in harmony, produce a richer and more powerful sound than any single voice. When we apply that to collective consciousness, it means that gatherings, meditations, or coordinated actions with a common focus have the potential to alter not only the internal state of the participants, but also the vibrational climate around them. It is no coincidence that, throughout history, movements capable of provoking significant change leaned on rituals, chants, symbols, and practices that induce group coherence. Those elements, often treated as folklore or as mere aesthetics, function as synchronization mechanisms. They align the minds, the emotions, and the intentions of multiple individuals, creating a field of resonance that amplifies the strength of the message and the capacity to attract concrete results. The inverse is also true. Crowds that gather under fragmented or contradictory emotional states have their strength dispersed. It is not the number of participants that determines the impact, but the degree of inner and collective alignment. A small but coherent group can influence more than a vibrationally disorganized mass. All of this reinforces that perception and response are not mere psychological details. They are the leverage point of the entire system. Changing perception is recalibrating the inner tuner, and that changes the frequency that you emit and receive. Sustaining that new tuning, even when the external environment has not yet changed, is the challenge, and, at the same time, the proof that the process is under conscious control. By understanding these main aspects, from media influence to the individual practice of state adjustment to the strength of collective coherence, you can see the full picture. Reality is not imposed from the outside in, but modulated from the inside out, with precision that is proportional to the degree of alignment. At that point, it becomes inevitable to ask, if it is possible to operate in this way, why do so few people do it? The answer begins to take shape when we examine who holds the knowledge of these laws and how they are applied, often in ways that are contrary to the interests of those who do not know them. When we look at who truly masters the art of shaping frequencies, we find a common trait: the practical understanding that every emotional state is a measurable signal that can be induced and exploited. It is not a coincidence that advertising conglomerates, digital platforms, and power structures employ neuroscientists, behavioral psychologists, and neuromarketing specialists. The mission is not merely to communicate, but to design stimuli that lead millions of people to specific vibrational states: desire, anxiety, euphoria, or fear, each of them with a distinct electromagnetic signature. That emotional engineering is more sophisticated than most people suppose. Colors, rhythms, framing, repetition, and word choices. Everything is calibrated to provoke the desired response. What looks like entertainment or information is, very often, a mass synchronization mechanism. When a state is repeated consistently, the corresponding frequency becomes predominant in the collective, like a choir that gradually drowns out every other melody. The effect is not neutral. An audience that is kept in constant anxiety makes faster, less critical decisions, and tends to seek relief in products, leaders, or narratives that have been prepared in advance. In this scenario, passivity is the greatest vulnerability. Whoever consumes stimuli without filtering adopts, even without noticing, states that he or she did not consciously choose. Because every internal state is also a vibrational emission, passive adoption means taking part in a collective frequency that can be in total disagreement with personal goals. Neville Goddard clearly described that danger. Allowing the environment to dictate your state of consciousness is to relinquish your role as creator. The countermeasure, according to him, is to assume deliberately the desired state by cultivating images, sensations, and thoughts that confirm it until they become natural. However, that practice requires more than good intentions. Emotion is the fuel that fixes a state in both memory and body. Without emotional intensity, the mental image is nothing more than a sketch. That is why ideas that are devoid of feeling rarely translate into action. The word emotion, which derives from the Latin emovere, literally means to move out. It is the energetic movement that is generated by emotion that signals to the body and to the mind that something is relevant enough to be prioritized. The more intense the emotion, the stronger the associated neural circuits, and the more stable the resulting frequency. From a physiological point of view, each emotion alters the inner chemistry, and with it, the electromagnetic signature of all your cells. The human body contains trillions of cells, each of which is sensitive to variations in the field that is generated by the heart and the brain. Prolonged states of gratitude or enthusiasm generate coherent patterns that favor cellular regeneration and mental clarity. Chronic states of frustration or anger generate incoherent patterns that affect everything from immunity to decision-making. This reality has direct practical implications. Living as if the goal were already accomplished is not a make-believe game. It is a deliberate adjustment of the inner state to match the frequency of the desired result. When that condition is sustained, changes begin to manifest not by chance, but by resonance. People, circumstances, and opportunities that are compatible are drawn into the field that you have created. The common mistake is to wait for external signs to authorize inner change, which keeps a person tuned to the frequency of lack and prolongs it indefinitely. On the collective level, the conscious application of that principle is even more powerful. Small groups that are aligned with the frequency of abundance, peace, or innovation can influence entire ecosystems, not only through physical action, but also through the vibrational field they radiate. Physics suggests that coherent fields tend to propagate, gradually aligning neighboring systems. That is the same mechanism that, on the opposite side, allows fear and division campaigns to spread so efficiently. There is, therefore, a silent dispute for control of the collective vibrational spectrum. On one side, there are structures that feed low-frequency emotions in order to maintain predictability and control. On the other side, there are individuals and groups who are beginning to understand that an inner frequency shift is the key to transforming not only their own lives, but also their surrounding environment. That dispute does not take place in parliaments or in courts, but in the intimacy of the mind and the heart of every person. Recognizing that dynamic is uncomfortable because it dismantles the idea of neutrality. There is no neutral internal state. The absence of conscious choice is, by itself, a choice to align with the predominant frequency of the environment. Regaining vibrational sovereignty requires vigilance and daily practice. That implies carefully selecting what you consume in terms of information, which conversations you sustain, and which environments you frequent, not as isolation, but as an intentional curation of the frequencies to which you expose yourself. The good news is that this process does not require a massive scale to produce a real impact. A single individual in a state of consistent coherence exerts influence over his or her immediate surroundings, and the repetition of that pattern, multiplied by a few people, is already enough to alter the atmosphere of a space or of a network of relationships. It is the vibrational equivalent of turning on a light in a dark room. The presence of light immediately changes the perception and the behavior of anyone who enters. What emerges from this analysis is a clear choice. To continue operating in automatic mode is to remain vulnerable to the manipulation of other people's frequencies. To take command of your own frequency is to enter the game as a co-author, defining not only what you want, but also who you are while you pursue it. That distinction is crucial because the field that you emit does not respond to abstract desire. It responds to the real state that you sustain. The implications are profound. Understanding and applying these inner laws shifts the axis of power. The individual stops being a passive node in a network of influences and becomes an active point of emission, one that is capable of reorganizing patterns around him or her. If that is significant on a personal level, imagine what happens when that knowledge is taken to the level of collective intention, where multiple emitters in coherence create a field with the potential to reshape entire realities. If individual intention is already capable of altering the course of events, what can we say about intention that is shared by thousands, millions, or even billions of minds and hearts? Physics gives us a clue. When multiple sources emit waves at the same frequency and the same phase, the result is not merely addition, it is exponential multiplication. It is the principle that can make a bridge collapse if soldiers all march in lockstep, and it is the principle that allows a choir to fill an entire cathedral with harmony without artificial amplification. In the field of consciousness, the logic is identical. History is full of examples of monumental changes that began as an isolated thought. The abolition of regimes, the advance of civil rights, and disruptive scientific discoveries, all of those originated in a single mind that dared to sustain a different vision. However, when that vision is adopted by many people and reinforced by aligned emotions, the transformation stops being slow and becomes inevitable. At that point, the notion of collective intention stops sounding like idealism and starts to be recognized as a practical strategy for shaping the trajectory of entire societies. The current world, which is marked by conflicts, instability, and successive crises, offers fertile and dangerous ground for that type of influence. The same mechanics that can amplify a vision of peace and prosperity can, if directed by destructive forces, accelerate division and collapse. That is where the inescapable responsibility of those who understand how these laws work comes in. Ignoring their use does not prevent others from applying them, and giving up your own participation guarantees that the outcome will be defined by other people's intentions. To visualize a different world collectively is not an exercise in escapism, it is an act of vibrational engineering. Every thought that is directed toward a desired reality is like a pulse of energy that is emitted into the fabric of the collective field. By itself, it may seem insignificant. However, when billions of pulses begin to vibrate in sync, they form a wave that is capable of reconfiguring the dominant pattern. That is the essence of constructive interference on a planetary scale. Imagine for a moment that every person dedicated a few minutes each day to sustain a clear image of reconciliation in regions at war, of the restoration of devastated ecosystems, and of shared abundance instead of competitive scarcity. Do not do it as a vague prayer, but with the emotional intensity of someone who has already witnessed the result, feeling in the body the reality that he or she wants to see manifested. When millions repeat that practice, it not only influences the collective field, it redefines it. We must understand that this is not a naive proposal. Conflicts do not dissolve only with good intentions. Power structures and entrenched interests resist deep changes. However, to underestimate the impact of collective alignment is to ignore a vector of influence that has always been present, even if it has been diffuse. Mass movements that altered the course of history were often preceded by an almost imperceptible shift in the emotional and mental climate of entire populations. That shift is rarely spontaneous. It is cultivated, sometimes deliberately by those who want transformation, and sometimes by those who want to stop any advance. By recognizing this, every individual stops being merely a spectator and becomes an active part in the formation of the collective field. The choice that presents itself is direct. Which frequency are you going to feed? It is impossible not to contribute. The only variable is what you contribute. Sustaining images of decay and fear, even in opposition to what you want, still reinforces those frequencies in the field. Sustaining images of construction and harmony with the same intensity and without giving in to discouragement feeds an alternative pattern that can grow until it becomes dominant. That is the point where individual practice meets the multiplying power of collectivity. The field that is created by multiple coherent emitters not only directly influences those who participate in it, but also begins to affect, gradually, those who are near it vibrationally, like concentric circles that expand in a lake. Small changes in attitude, perception, and choice begin to appear in people who never consciously participated in the collective effort. That is how resonance spreads, through the subtle contagion of higher patterns. The final provocation is inevitable. If it is possible to create fields of destruction through aligned collective intentions, and history proves that it is, why not apply the same principle with equal discipline to create fields of healing and prosperity? That question is not rhetorical. It is a direct invitation to assume a role that goes beyond the personal pursuit of well-being. In the end, everything returns to the initial point: frequency. What you think, what you feel, and what you sustain does not remain confined to your mind. It propagates, it interacts, and it interferes in the shared field in which we are all immersed. That field is not owned by anyone, but it is shaped by everyone. When you understand that, the responsibility becomes evident. There is no vibrational neutrality. Either you contribute to the coherence that builds, or you contribute to the noise that destroys. The present moment demands a conscious decision about which of those two vectors you will feed. That decision cannot be delegated. It is made daily in the thoughts that you repeat, in the images that you cultivate, and in the emotions that you choose to maintain. Each of those elements is an emission into the field, and every emission is a silent vote for the kind of reality that will become dominant. Every change begins with the understanding of your role as a co-creator, and the only way to connect with that divine intelligence is through meditation. We have developed a set of audio tools to help you access that higher state of consciousness. To learn more and to get immediate access, click the link on the screen or in the comments. If this video resonated with you, write in the comments, "It made sense to me."